this series is called Tea with Dogen. And I say we, as though I've been with you the whole time. We've been moving through these essays by Eihei Dogen. Before I get ahead of myself, too, I want to give a shout out to the students who are in the Essential Dogen class. So some of you I see are online, and some of you I see in person in 3 dimensions. It's been a wonderful class where we've been reading Dogen's work every week and then having discussions about how to interpret his language, because Dogen wrote in this very poetic style. And often, as we've discussed in class, the images that Dogen uses can be read in several different ways. So there's always this interpretive work to do with Dogen's writing, which is really exciting. It gives us freedom and an opportunity to study his expression of the Dharma. Is anyone here unfamiliar with Dogen? Thinking, who is this Dogen guy? Okay, I see somebody, yeah. So Dogen, Eihei Dogen, was the founder of Soto Zen, a very important 13th century Zen master and teacher. And if I start to talk about him for too long, my time will be up, because there's so much to say about Dogen. But if I had to orient somebody really quickly to Dogen, I might say that one of his really important questions in his practice was, if all beings are inherently enlightened, why do we need to practice? Why do we need to practice if we're all inherently awake? And through his own practice and study and encounter with various teachers, he had a realization that practice is awakening. That as soon as we sit in zazen on the cushion and take our seat, we are manifesting and actualizing this thing called awakening. So maybe that's helpful. Maybe that's helpful. I'm going to talk about dreams today. How many of us are fans of dreams? Almost everybody. Very popular, right? In our culture to think about dreams, talk about dreams, share dreams. This essay that I'm focusing on today is a very dense work by Eihei Dogen called Expressing the Dream Within a Dream. Expressing the Dream Within a Dream. In ancient Japan, they had a slightly different understanding of dreams than we do in our contemporary moment. So in ancient Japan, people saw dreams as expressions of messages. Messages from divinities and from ancestors were delivered through dreams. And people took their dreams very seriously and tried to understand what those messages were. And at the same time, in ancient Japan, they also had an understanding that dreams were related to the dreamer's inner thoughts. So there's an interesting relationship there between this idea of dreams as messages coming from outside of one, from divinities or ancestors, and then dreams as expressions of thought. And I think that Dogen plays with those in his essay. So in my short amount of time, I want to talk about 3 ways that we can look at this phrase, expressing the dream within the dream. Dogen's fascicle begins. I'm just going to read from his essay. The path of all Buddhas and ancestors arises before the first forms emerge. It cannot be spoken of using conventional views. The Dharma wheel has been set to turn before the first sign of forms emerged. Within a dream, this is the dream you express. Because awakening is seen within awakening, the dream is expressed within a dream. So if we all understand that, I don't need to say anything else, but I think it might be helpful to say more. And I have to say that I'm also, when I'm giving you that passage from Dogen, I'm making my own choices in what I'm cutting out and including from the paragraph. So at certain points, I'm eliding or jumping over certain phrases or words. and trying to find something that I think is essential. And what really interested me in this opening paragraph was this idea that the path of Buddhas and ancestors arises before the first forms emerge. And I thought, what does that mean? What is this path of Buddhas that arises before the emergence of forms? How can we find this path? How can we express this path? So the first way I was thinking about expressing the dream within the dream is that it's about the relationship between the relative and the absolute, about the relative conventional experience that we have of being in the world, in which we perceive ourselves as separate from objects and other beings. There's an appearance of subject and object. There is a consciousness that's influenced by causes and conditions. And then there's also this absolute realm in which beings don't exist. Awakening functions without hindrance. There is no self and other, or subject and object. So I was thinking about expressing the dream within the dream have something to do with that. What's the relationship between the relative and the absolute? I'll talk more about that. I'm just giving you the outline. And then the second thing I was thinking about was maybe this phrase, the dream within the dream, or the dream within a dream, is a way of talking about how we practice together. Maybe it's a certain model for how we practice in Sangha and with all beings. And then the third way I wanted to think about this phrase, expressing the dream within a dream, was dreaming as a verb, like to dream. Dreaming as aspiration or as envisioning. Like, I have a dream that one day, or I could go on, Martin Luther King Jr.'s I have a dream speech. Dreaming as an activity, dreaming as an engagement with the imagination that facilitates our practice. So I'm going to talk a lot more about those three things, and that will be my talk. First, I wanted to just mention a little bit more about this notion of the dream within the dream as speaking to the relative and the absolute, and how the relative and the absolute are connected to each other. So as I was mentioning, my individual body and mind experiences a world in a particular way. And that consciousness and that experience is karmically shaped by all of my previous thoughts and acts of body, speech, and mind. And also, I'm interacting with other karmic consciousnesses around me. All of us in this room have a particular experience of being in your own body and mind. And as we interact with each other, we co-create or co-construct an experience that we share. And we may not be aware of how complex that relationship and that co-creation is, or that co-construction is. In the Diamond Sutra, which Dogen also mentions in this essay, the Diamond Sutra, it says, all conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble or a shadow, like a drop of dew and also a flash of lightning. We should see them like this. All conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, or a shadow, like a drop of dew and also a flash of lightning. All conditioned things are ephemeral. They're transient. And they lack stable, solitary existence. So Galen Roshi very kindly took me to an exhibit at the MFAH a few days ago called The Floating Worlds. Anyone seen that? Floating World? Oh, yes, yeah. And in this amazing exhibit by a pair of artists who call themselves A.A. Murakami, I think. There was one room that we entered where these enormous bubble shapes would emerge from the wall. And then Galen Roshi said, look, it's these huge contraptions that are producing these bubbles are like large versions of those wands that kids hold and they blow through to create bubbles. But these opened and shut with a certain mechanism, and a huge bubble would come out, and it was filled with vapor. And the vapor was roiling inside the bubbles. And you just watch these bubble shapes emerge and come towards you, watch the vapor spinning inside them, and then at one point they dissipated. It was so beautiful, such a beautiful expression of transience, of impermanence, and also the way in which all those bubble shapes were connected. Although they were separate, they were all bubbles with vapor inside of them that were shimmering, responding to conditions around them, reflecting light in various ways. So I was thinking about that when I was reading about, from the Diamond Sutra, about this idea of all conditioned phenomenon being like a bubble, like a dream, something that's always in flux and dynamically connected. A very important contemporary Japanese teacher, Shohaku Okamura, he wrote about this passage in the Diamond Sutra, and Okamura says, "Within our original dream, we feel that self and things exist independently. When we awaken from this illusion, we see that our sense of separation is the real dream." And I would add, I think Dogen would say, and we're still within the dream.
Could you read that passage again?
Yes, Shohaku Okamura says, "Within our original dream, we feel that self and things exist independently. When we awaken from this illusion, we see that our sense of separation is the real dream." So there I see this kind of dynamic between the relative and an opening to this larger vision that goes beyond the relative conventional experience, in which we understand that separation is an illusion. But I think one of the wonderful complexities in Dogen is that I think Dogen would say, well, we're still within a dream, because not to jump ahead of myself, but to jump ahead of myself, awakening and delusion are the same dream. In a sense, there's a non-dual vision of what this dream is and what this dreaming means. But I love that really clear, concise statement from Okamura. This leads me to my... Oh, time flies. Talk the Dharma. This leads me to my second point, my second kind of glimpse of this dream, which is that expressing the dream within the dream is how we practice together and how we live together. I was thinking about expressing the dream within the dream as sitting zazen, when we sit zazen in the zendo together. And have you ever had that experience where you're sitting zazen and you notice you've been daydreaming? This happens to me frequently. You're like, oh, wait, I'm here. I'm here. I come back. And so I'm committed to coming back, to trying to notice and to come back and to be present in the moment. And then I have this wonderful understanding that everybody else sitting zazen with me is also going through this experience where they're drifting, perhaps their attention wanders, and then they come back. It's like this daydreaming activity is connecting us in a particular way, as is our vow to come back and to pay attention and to notice our breathing, our posture, to return. So we're all expressing the dream within the dream, in a sense, when we're wholeheartedly sitting zazen in the same space together. And Dogen has some beautiful natural images that he uses to describe this process. He calls it entanglement. Entanglement. I'll just read a few sentences from the fascicle. Are you ready? You're ready?
Ready.
Dogen writes, "All things leave and arrive all right here. all things leave and all things arrive right here. This being so, one plants twining vines and gets entangled in twining vines. This is the characteristic of unsurpassable enlightenment. Just as enlightenment is limitless, sentient beings are limitless and unsurpassable. Just as cages and snares are limitless, emancipation from them is limitless. It's really beautiful. Really beautiful, I think, this idea, this botanical image of us planting vines together in our practice and getting entangled in each other's vines. We're entangled continuously whether we want to be or not, right? We're entangled in so many ways. If all of you weren't here, I wouldn't be giving this talk. I promise you. I'm totally entangled with you right now. I'm like joyfully entangled with all of you, looking at your faces. And in this entangling, I noticed too that I form impressions of other people who I'm in close relationship with. I have certain images of them. I attach to certain representations of those people, and they help me to understand my concept of who those people are. I'm looking at somebody who I can pick on without too much terrible repercussion later. Like Neely, my Dharma brother. Like I have an impression of Neely, and it's very wonderful. And if you were to come and ask me, how do you feel about Neely? I would say a lot of great things about Neely. But I don't think that that impression or that representation I have of him is the entirety of who he is. I know that Neely is really much more than I can describe or apprehend or hold in mind. My representation of him is kind of like a dream I have of who he is. But he's not limited by my dream of who he is. And he'll show me that too, right? I can test that. There'll be maybe moments where my impression of him, my dream of him, gets disrupted in an interesting way, or vice versa. And then we're really entangled in this certain way. We have this entanglement presents many dharma gates that we can pass through and work with as we study and explore how our dreams about other people and about ourselves can be clarified, how they're inherently limited, and they can be worked with in various ways. Oh, good. I'm almost on to number 3. Keeping good time. I would say also, we could extend this entanglement in many dimensions, in many directions. And in the sense that we're entangled as communities, we're entangled in community, we're entangled in larger social structures, we're entangled in professional settings and different kinds of bureaucracies. And those are all arenas for our practice and for working with this very deep relationship that we have with each other, particularly when the dream we have of the person is might be painful or challenging to open to. I wanted to also talk about dreaming, about dreams as creative activity, and particularly ways of working with stories that may help us to express the dream within the dream. In terms of Sigmund Freud's idea about dreams, I think one useful concept that Freud brings is Freud says that dreams are structured like a language. In other words, you can look at dreams and the images in dreams and the events, and you can, in a sense, read them, or you can understand them because the dreams themselves are expressed through a certain kind of language by which what's unconscious or subconscious wants to be made conscious. So the unconscious or subconscious contents of your mind emerges in dreams through a kind of symbolic language. Does that make sense? And I just find that interesting because I think this idea about language is something that's really interesting and fundamental to Dogen. Later in his fascicle, he talks about the enlightenment story of Shakyamuni Buddha. And he shares a verse from the Lotus Sutra in which Shakyamuni's Buddha's story is told. And I think it's pretty important part of this essay. So first Dogen comments, well, I'll jump into the, this is from the Lotus Sutra that he's quoting. This is the story of Shakyamuni Buddha. It's given. Such is the fine dream that ever occurs. In the dream you are made king, then forsake palace and household entourage, along with utmost satisfaction of the 5 sense desires, and travel to the site of practice under the Bodhi tree. On the lion's seat, in search of the way, after 7 days you attain the wisdom of the Buddhas, completing the unsurpassable way. Arising and turning the Dharma wheel, you expound the Dharma for the 4 groups of practitioners throughout thousands of millions of kalpas, expressing the wondrous Dharma free of flaws and liberating innumerable sentient beings. I'll stop there. And I find this really moving and very interesting that Dogen shares this story, this ancient story. I'll call it a story form, right? Because it's a story that's been told in many ways with different iterations. But what's interesting to me too is that in this verse and in this translation at least, there's a shift to the you. In the dream, you are made king. You, the reader, or you, the listener, are placed in the position of the one who's experiencing this dream of awakening and saving all beings. And there's something really, really dynamic about that, I think, as a suggestion for one of the countless ways of expressing the dream within the dream is to think about the stories that you're inhabiting and that you're living, and the way in which you can consciously engage with those stories, and how you can create stories that help you in the practice. And Dogen here is commenting on this story. He says, this dream of Buddhas is not an analogy. As the wondrous Dharma of all Buddhas is mastered only by a Buddha together with a Buddha, all Dharmas awakened in the dream are genuine forms. Do I need to read that again? Yeah, this dream of Buddhas is not an analogy. It's not just a comparison. It's actual. It's substantial in a particular way. As the wondrous Dharma of all Buddhas is mastered only by a Buddha together with a Buddha, somebody has to speak and somebody has to read, right? Somebody has to write, somebody has to read, somebody has to speak, somebody has to listen. There's a dialogue that happens between the Buddha and a Buddha and a Buddha. All dharmas awakened in the dream are genuine forms. So it occurs to me that one of these forms, these genuine forms of the Dharma, is the story itself. That by retelling the story, we perpetuate a model of how one can awaken within the dream and then express this awakening. And another example of how someone has played with this dream, this idea of expressing a dream within a dream, is the poem that I gave to you, which was written by a poet named Ron Padgett. And he's a second-generation New York poet. And Ron Padgett here he's playing with the story form, what I'm going to call the story form, from the Taoist sage Zhuangzi. And many of you are probably familiar with this story. It's very simple. A man wakes up from a dream in which he dreamt he was a butterfly. And upon awakening, he wonders, am I a man who dreamt that he was a butterfly? Or am I now a butterfly dreaming he is a man? Moving through this dream veil, right, between self and other. And so Ron Padgett is not a Buddhist, disclaimer. But I find that this poem has a lot of resonance with what Dogen is saying. So I'll read this. Butterfly, relatively short. Also, notice that Shuang in Zhuangzi is misspelled. I found it interesting. The A and the U are inverted. And I thought for a long time, is he just playing around with us, like the butterfly and the man and the butterfly confusion? Or is he just making an error that editors didn't catch, right? So, butterfly. Zhuangzi wrote about the man who dreamed he was a butterfly, and when he woke up, wondered if he weren't now a butterfly dreaming he was a man. I love this idea, though I doubt that Zhuangzi really thought that a man would think he is a butterfly. For it's one thing to wake up from a dream in the night, and another to spend your whole life dreaming you are a man. I have spent my whole life thinking I was a boy, then a man, also a person and an American, and a physical entity and a spirit, and maybe a little bit butterfly. Maybe I should be more butterfly. That is, lurch into a room with bulging eyes and big flapping wings that throw a choking powder onto people who scream and fall dead. Almost. For I would rescue them with the celestial music of my beauty and my utter harmlessness, my ethereal disregard of what they are. So just saying something about this poem, I find it a beautiful expression of this flexibility to express the dream within the dream, to play with these ancient story forms or these received forms, whether they're narrative forms or forms of other kinds of forms of contemplation, writing forms I'm thinking about, speaking. And I also really enjoy the inversion, the kind of complexity of the butterfly in the poem, where it throws a choking powder, which threatens everyone's life. Oh no! Now it rescues them with its harmlessness and utter disregard of who they are, which is kind of a space of openness. This utter disregard is a kind of kindness because it allows them to be whatever they are without hindrance or expectation. And the speaker of the poem is allowing himself to be that, too, to be that complexity. Oh gosh, okay, conclusion time. Conclusion time for now. I wanted to mention too, it's dangerous having a writer in your midst because they notice things and they're going to talk about them, right? So I was noticing my friend Sally and her beautiful ikebana process the other day, and she was in the kitchen making these beautiful, one of them I think is out in the foyer, these beautiful ikebana compositions. And then there was a bowl of cuttings. And I remember, she can correct me if I'm wrong, I remember her saying, I'm kind of sad I have to, cut these pieces and put them in this bowl and not use them, but I'm consoled knowing they're going to go into the compost. So there's a way in which that, I was looking at the ikebana and the elements, and it was completely entangled in a way. They were all woven together and working together. But it was surrounded by a kind of spaciousness, a deliberate kind of spaciousness. So it felt like an expression of the dream within this larger dream of emptiness or openness. And I felt like the cuttings were completely still part of the dream of intentional activity. I just wanted to say that. And so I really appreciate those efforts. At the end of Dogen's very dense and fascinating essay, which I encourage all of you to read at some point, Dogen brings together these ideas, the relative and the absolute, being co-expressed and in relation to each other, the idea of the dream as a kind of practice space in which we're all entangled and disentangling and re-entangling, and we're noticing all of our ideas about that and thoughts and feelings, and this idea of dreaming as creating, as aspiring to envision the Bodhisattva way of living. And Dogen writes, awakening and dreaming are from the beginning one suchness, the genuine reality. The Buddha Dharma, even if it were an analogy, is the genuine reality. As it is not an analogy, made king in the dream is the genuine truth of the Buddha Dharma. Shakyamuni Buddha and all Buddhas and ancestors each arouse the mind, cultivate practice, and attain universal true awakening within a dream. This being so, the Buddha's path of transforming the Saha world throughout his lifetime is indeed created in a dream. So I hope we can all keep dreaming together and practicing within these dreams and actualizing the path through dreaming. And we have so much help and assistance from all the Buddhas and ancestors. Thank you all very much.